In the heart of the desert, 30 miles east of Cairo and 37 miles away from the Suez Canal, a whole new city is being built. They've already built the tallest tower in Africa and the largest cathedral in the Middle East. And the city itself is part of a series of grand mega projects by Egypt's president Abdel Fattah el-Sisi aimed at boosting the country's economy. The city he's building is supposed to become the country's alternative capital, covering an area of 270 square miles, almost the size of Singapore. About 5 million people will live in the new capital. But it seems that the ambitious project is costing Egypt much more than originally planned. The country's on the brink of an economic crisis. Just an unobtrusive reminder, and thanks, you know what for. So Egypt's new capital, what's it actually like? The plan is really grand. It includes a new presidential palace, a new parliament building, and space set aside for foreign embassies, as well as new buildings for various government administrations. Besides government areas, there will be districts for business and finance, art and culture, and upcoming investment projects. Once completed, the expanded park, called Green River, will wind its way through the heart of the city and will be double the size of Central Park in New York. Because you can't just go and not compete with some other country. The thing is, there are questions about how all these trees will be watered, considering the dry landscape and the country's limited water supply. But no one's answered these questions yet. But they say that the buildings of the new capital should be among the most grandiose in the world, overshadowing many others in Africa and the Middle East. The city will have a whole series of massive skyscrapers, the tallest of which will be the iconic tower with a height of about 1,300 feet. They've also already built one of the largest mosques on the continent, the Egyptian Grand Mosque, which opened in 2023, as well as the largest cathedral in the Middle East, the Cathedral of the Nativity of Christ. It was opened in 2019. In the new capital, they're also planning to build the headquarters of Egypt's Ministry of Defense called the Octagon. It might be big enough to rival the Pentagon in the U.S. Add to this artificial lakes, about 2,000 educational institutions, a tech and innovation park, 18 hospitals, 1,250 mosques and churches, a stadium with 93,440 seats, 40,000 hotel rooms, a major theme park 4 times the size of Disneyland, 35 square miles of solar power plants, and an electrified railway connection to Cairo. Can you feel the scale? This is something grand. The new capital is also expected to feature cutting-edge technology, including AI, that'll help optimize electricity, gas, and water usage, as well as waste management. Fiber optic networks and the launch of 5G will improve communication, and there will be high-tech security systems with thousands of cameras across the city. These cameras will also monitor traffic and provide alerts about traffic jams and accidents. However, they promise that the cost of living in the new capital will be the same as in the old one. It's just that everything here will be new, modern, and as eco-friendly as possible. In short, the goal is to provide residents with only the best. But obviously, the reason for creating a new capital is more than just that. Look at the current capital of Egypt, Cairo. Its population has grown from 8 million to more than 22 million since 1984. And it turns out that's way too many. Cairo's barely functioning. Ministries and embassies surrounding Tahrir Square clog up the city's arteries. Not literally, of course, but since many streets are closed off to ensure the safety of these buildings, sometimes it's just impossible to get from point A to point B in the city. The scariest part is the forecasts. It's expected that the already huge 22 million population of the capital will double by 2050. And this growing population needs to be housed somewhere, while also reducing traffic jams and pollution in Cairo. Just so you understand, the population density here is one of the highest in the world. It's true that Cairo doesn't even make it into the top 10 in the ranking of the most densely populated cities. For example, in Manila, the most densely populated city in the world, the population density is about twice as high. But that doesn't mean that the number of people living in Cairo can't create problems. Some experts agree that Cairo is overpopulated, but they doubt that building a new city is the solution. This is because the old capital already has a vast housing stock that's perfectly usable. It just needs some investment. If the government spent even a small part of its massive investments to help the existing city function properly, the overpopulation problem would solve itself. At the same time, it's hard not to agree that Egypt, with the population growing by more than 1 million people a year, desperately needs more housing. And the current situation in Cairo is making people dream about escaping to a new, better capital. You can see why. On top of that, there are other reasons to build a new city. All the big international companies are looking for smart cities and sustainable development, so to bring in these companies, the right conditions need to be set up. It's all about making business operations simple and appealing. Officials are hoping that the Smart City project in Egypt will serve as a model for other African countries, boosting economic growth in the region and generally being the best solution. Also, for foreign investment. What country would say no to that? Even construction work itself is a huge economic opportunity. To build a new city, you need not just money, but also cement, bricks, electrical equipment, safety gear, and most importantly, labor. So this project is a chance to create the jobs the country needs and revive Egypt's key industries. Especially since Egypt has been in the construction game for thousands of years. Apart from ordinary people, the new capital will also be useful for the military. 51% of ACUD, the company overseeing the project, belongs to the Egyptian Armed Forces and the remaining 49% to the Ministry of Housing. And that's clearly not by accident. The military is expected to make a certain profit once the construction's finished. The project is so massive and promises such high returns that it should open up business opportunities. For example, one of Egypt's largest construction companies, Talat Mustafa Group, has laid the foundation for Noor City, a smart city project in the new capital. Projects like these encourage businesses to support the government and also bring in significant tax revenue. For instance, Noor City is expected to generate $7 billion in taxes for the budget. Of course, a new capital will delight the president of the country, where the cult of personality has long been an important part of politics. And while the new capital won't be named after Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, it's his flagship project and legacy. The president's regular visits to the city are widely covered by the state media. In short, it's impossible to think of the new city without thinking of el-Sisi. Moving the capital will give the president a few extra points in terms of security. On February 1st, 2011, the people of Egypt marched from Tahrir Square to Mubarak's presidential palace to force el-Sisi to resign. But if they shift the capital and the administrative center somewhere new, it'll be much harder for people to get there, to show their discontent. Even if the dissatisfied people decide to protest, it'll take them a whole day to walk through the new city area. So we've covered the reasons and benefits. Now let's see how the construction's progressing. It actually started in 2016 and is going step by step. They finish one section, report, then start a new one, and keep going like that. The first phase of construction's almost done, and the second is expected to start in the last quarter of 2024. However, more than 1,500 families have already moved to the new capital, and by the end of 2024, this number is expected to grow to 10,000. The ministries have also been moved, so there are already about 48,000 government employees working in the city. However, many of them don't live in the new capital and commute to work from East Cairo on an electric train that started running last year. In March 2025, when the parliament starts holding its sessions in the city and several banks and companies move their headquarters there, the population will grow even more. Eventually, the plan is for the whole country to be run from the new capital. By the way, the second phase, which hasn't started yet, is expected to cost about 300 billion Egyptian pounds. That's around $6.4 billion. And there's still going to be a third and fourth phase. And then I started wondering, if they build the city and people move there from Cairo, there'll be a lot of empty buildings left in the old capital. What's going to happen to them? Well, actually, all these buildings belong to the same company that owns the new capital. There are no clear plans for these buildings yet, but there are a couple of ideas. Mostly they're located in the elite center of Cairo, and in the future, for example, they could be turned into hotels. The profits will go to the company and, of course, to the new capital. This all sounds promising, if you don't think about the problems the new capital project is facing. Meanwhile, the first phase of construction cost around 500 billion Egyptian pounds. That's $10.6 billion. And this is considering that the total cost of the project was previously estimated at about $58 billion. Yep, you got that right. The capital isn't even close to being finished, but they've already spent a ton of money on it. At the same time, the government stated that the project would be funded solely by the company ACUD and the revenue from land sales, although some reports seem to suggest that the capital is costing the government billions of dollars. More and more doubts are emerging about whether the country can even afford to make El-Sisi's grand dream a reality. Critics are concerned about the spending as the country's going through an economic downturn and facing increased pressure from the conflict in the Middle East. The Egyptian economy, after all, is supported by international funding, including from the World Bank. Over the last 6 to 8 years, the International Monetary Fund has given Egypt at least 3 loans totaling around $20 billion, but the country's still in crisis. In the end, critics are outraged that the president, I quote, is borrowing money from abroad to build a huge city for the rich. Meanwhile, Egypt itself is making too little to cover its debts. The political situation in Europe also affects Egypt. In 2022, interest rates and food prices shot up, and the financial situation became so tight that the government ordered shopping malls, stadiums, and other public institutions to regulate air conditioning and dim the lights in order to sell more energy abroad. A lot of economists are warning that Egypt is one of the few countries at a significant risk of defaulting on its debts. The situation is so dire that even President El-Sisi's supporters are concerned about the looming economic hardships. But the issue with the new capital isn't just its massive cost. The city under construction needs water and plans to take it from the Nile, the main source of water of the country. But the Nile's already drained, and the lands around it are already suffering. To make room for new highways running through Cairo to the new city, workers cut down sections of trees in the old Heliopolis district. Large areas of a big cemetery were also demolished, all for the construction of roads between Cairo and the new capital. And to make it even more depressing, hundreds of thousands of Egyptians lost their homes because of this new capital, even though they live over 60 miles away from it. Entire neighborhoods were demolished by bulldozers, including ancient monuments that were there. In less than 9 years of construction, it's reported that 1,000 new bridges and highways have been built, and they didn't put them on empty land. At the same time, it's completely unclear who will be able to live in the new capital once it's finished. Although it was initially announced that residents of Cairo could move there, the housing in the new capital is sold at very high prices. For example, a 2-bedroom apartment costs around $50,000, an enormous amount for many in a country where the GDP per capita is about $3,000. So it turns out that the new capital will probably become just another gated community for the wealthiest, meaning it won't be able to meet the housing needs of ordinary people in Cairo, the ones who are really struggling with overpopulation in the city. But the saddest part is that Egyptian leaders have already built satellite cities near Cairo, like 6th of October and New Cairo, established in 1979 and 2000 respectively. Today, these cities are almost completely gated communities serving the upper and middle classes. Yes, the new capital is definitely not Egypt's first attempt to build cities outside the Nile Delta and Valley to reduce Cairo's overcrowding. Previous efforts failed because the cities were only accessible to the wealthier classes. Housing prices were and still are so high that many apartments remain unsold. And of course, the government is aware, but in response to criticism, they said that there will be social housing built in the new capital. And that's it. No details, no deadlines, no plans, no guarantees. There's also been a problem with jobs. The new capital is supposed to create millions of jobs, but economists argue that most of the jobs created so far are low-paying construction work. They say that if the president doesn't make bigger changes like loosening the military's economic grip or reviving private businesses, the benefits of the new capital will fade pretty quickly. At the same time, ordinary Egyptians struggling with rising prices and falling standard of living were already paying for El-Sisi's ambitious projects. In 2015, he rushed to expand the Suez Canal at a cost of $8 billion, which was declared as Egypt's renaissance. But it didn't bring the promised profits, only losses. To give you an idea of the scale of the problem, last year the Suez Canal brought in $6.3 billion in revenue. That's way less than the government's initial forecast of $13 billion for 2023. So what's the outcome? Cairo's already surrounded by a lot of half-empty towns, each one a monument to the builder's failure to save the capital from overcrowding. Will the new capital escape this fate? Well, developers say that workers who can't afford to move to the new capital can take electric trains or monorail to get to work, but there's no guarantee that the new capital will be competitive. Experts insist just moving a few thousand employees to a new location isn't enough for the new capital to succeed. However, this doesn't stop developers. They're sure that the very idea of a new capital will attract plenty of new residents. The truth is, only about 10% of Egypt's population who have their own cars will find it easy to reach the new capital. Apart from high-ranking government and bank officials who can afford to live close to work in the new capital, why would anyone else move there? Where will they work? How will they send their kids to school? Where will they shop? And where will they get groceries? Right now, the new capital doesn't answer any of these questions, and it'll take decades before the city can become a place to live and work. How long will it take for the capital to justify its enormous cost? I don't have an answer to that, and neither do the experts. Electricity bankruptcy. Most of us are used to being active during the day and sleeping at night, but in Cairo, things are completely different. At 10 p.m., when it usually gets dark outside, the streets and cafes fill up with people. That's because during the day, people try to stay indoors and cool off with air conditioners since it's incredibly hot outside. At night, it cools down, so they can finally go out and get things done. Why am I telling you all this? In the summer of 2024, Egypt went through some big changes because of an energy shortage. The authorities introduced store hours restrictions, and now the streets become deserted by 10 p.m. The economic crisis, which has been going on for several years, forced the government to look for additional resources, making life worse for most people. Well, except for the wealthiest. In other words, the country's facing a natural gas shortage, and they can't afford to buy enough, which has led to regular power outages all over the country. And yes, it's all because of the new capital, which is literally draining resources from the other cities in Egypt. Since July, new rules have been introduced. In order to save electricity, stores must close at 10 p.m. Cafes, restaurants, and shopping malls have to shut down by midnight with a slight extension on weekends. The only exceptions are grocery stores and pharmacies. Now, imagine how it feels to shop or visit a cafe under the scorching sun. Not very pleasant. But the new capital demands money. A luxurious palace. Now let's have a look at this new city and check out something truly spectacular. Pictures are circulating on Egypt's social media, supposedly taken inside one of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's palaces. And this isn't just some pretty building in the city center. Based on the info we've got, the area exclusively for the president's residence covers about 540,000 square feet. By comparison, the White House only covers 54,000 square feet. Plus, the total area of the palace grounds enclosed by an outer wall is around 24 million square feet. And in the new palace, you can also see the so-called throne hall, which is made, mind you, entirely out of pure gold. You can tell right away that there's an economic crisis in the country. Naturally, the locals don't approve of building such a palace. According to some reports, the cost of building el-Sisi's palace in the new capital is around $3 billion. And that's not even including the foundation and furnishings. While the president's living in luxury, every third person in Egypt lives below the poverty line. Moreover, officials are calling for austerity measures. It just doesn't seem fair. What does the president himself say about the palace? Well, first he says that since he's changing the country, he can afford to build new palaces. Second, the new palaces aren't for him personally, but for the people of Egypt. It's pretty interesting how the people of Egypt will get to use the Golden Throne Hall, and when that might happen. First, Automotive City. What else does Egypt spend its budget on? Well, for instance, building other cities. For example, Egypt built the largest car city in the Middle East in just a year. True, it's located not far from the new administrative capital, so it's not exactly a separate project, or like a bonus. The city spans an area of about 59 acres and is designed to accommodate around 4,000 cars. It also features 14 traffic police offices, 5 prosecutors' offices, and 9 property registry offices. There are 7 bank branches and 8 auto service stations in the city, with roads built using cutting-edge tech. Of course, there are also restaurants, cafes, restrooms, and carports. What else can you find there? In the Automotive City, you'll find showrooms and exhibition halls of all sorts of car brands. There are also lots for new and used cars, stores with car parts and everything else even remotely connected to transportation. You get it, right? It's a whole city built just for servicing cars. A giant repair shop. Entry is, of course, not free, and drivers have to pay about 50 Egyptian pounds. That's a bit more than $1 US. Pedestrians can walk into the city for free, but it doesn't look like there's much for them to do there. Forbes Tower. Forbes Tower is another massive project as part of building the new capital. It's funded through joint Saudi-Egyptian investments and is expected to cost about $670 million. Not cheap. Plus, they say the skyscraper will be a trailblazer among eco-friendly buildings built to the highest global standards. A 787-foot tower with 43 floors is set to become an office building near Africa's tallest structure, the iconic tower. When it comes to sustainability, Forbes Tower will run on 75% hydrogen and 25% solar power, making it completely independent of the traditional power grid. Magnom, the company that's developing the project plan, claims that this solution will reduce carbon emissions during the construction phase, and it will be reduced significantly by as much as 58%. Magnom's goal is to create a skyscraper that actually removes more carbon dioxide from the air than it generates, a concept called net negative carbon vision. Plus, on-site water recycling and purification systems will help reduce fresh water consumption, a crucial step in tackling the country's growing water shortages. Sounds amazing, if they can pull it off. The new capital of Indonesia. Egypt isn't the only country planning to build a new capital. Indonesian President Joko Widodo wants to move the capital from Jakarta to a city called Nusantara, which is being built in East Kalimantan province on the island of Borneo, over 620 miles away from Jakarta. The construction is expected to cost $35 billion, and by 2045, Nusantara's population might hit nearly 2 million people. The new city will house the president's residence, government offices, and ministries. On top of that, both Indonesian authorities and private developers are actively working on building new residential areas in Nusantara. They've even launched a program called 1 Million Houses to help ramp up construction. But why does Indonesia need all this? First, the new capital is built to ease the pressure on Jakarta and stimulate development in new regions. Second, and this is the most important, Jakarta is very vulnerable to natural disasters. The main reason for moving the capital is the almost irreversible effects of land subsidence. In many commercial and residential areas, especially in the north of Jakarta, there have already been damages from flooding. Moreover, some areas are losing up to 10 inches of soil every year, and forecasts show that by 2050, significant parts of the city could end up underwater. Actually, this is a really big deal for Indonesia. And to explain everything in detail, we need to make a new video. So if you're interested, let us know in the comments. You owe me a like. See you later.